The scale of the AI is what causes concern, right? It is not the incidents basically. It's not ones and zeros. We don't have a mechanism on how to govern and scale AI. In my opinion, we are just wildly going basically, right? The regulatory requirements are not catching up to the evolution of the technology. You can't solve the new problem with old thinking. You can do a lot of things in a healthcare world, but the thing is very important is zero tolerance, right? There's no scope for margin of error is very limited. For every decision an AI takes, a human has to bless it.
When human makes a bad decision, it doesn't get viral. But when AI makes a bad decision, it does go viral.
People ignore it. They think that it is somebody's job. No, it is your job because you will have implications as a leader.
Welcome to the Enterprise Cloud and AI Forum Voices, ECAF Voices. I'd like to thank Simform for helping me build a community around many of cloud and AI conversations, all included ROI and the execution challenges.
This is our second podcast. And as we promised in the first podcast, we're bringing a lineup, a slew of speakers across the globe who have tremendous experience, challenges with transforming at a scale and a speed, and not talking about the AI. And with that, I have the second speaker, a very good friend of mine, Murali, an acting CTO and a chief architect, uh, who's done transformations that will make a short hell of a fire, an interesting podcast for sure. Murali, why don't you fire up?
Thank you. Appreciate Ram, and thanks for the invitation. And I'm delighted to be part of the conversation. So obviously, I think at the end of the day, the tech is tech. I know AI is disrupting the world, but I think it's all about creating the value for the business, basically.
True.
I think that's what that really excites people like us, in fact. And obviously, some background about me for the people. Um, I bring about 25 years of health tech experience, in fact, working for large payers and within the payers, transforming like the areas, So I always work with startup mindset. Basically, I'm one of those guys who are fortunate that, opportunities, come to me. So obviously, if you really look at it, it's always, what is the value that you bring to the table? How, are you the influencer, basically? If you're a tech who can code yourself, you can probably code. But the thing is, you got to be horizontal, basically. The horizontalizing the things is very, very important. Influencing, and then, of course, putting your bets on the right things, and then partnership ecosystem is very key. And, I always use these things basically, right? Top down where you want to tie the strategy. So you want to link it, right? And the bottom up is where you want to win the teams so that they can connect to the strategy. And then outside in is where you want to really outside bring in the thinking where what's happening in the industry. For example, sometimes I talk to people like you to understand what's happening. And you have to tie these three together. And now I'm here to really bring that inside out where I would like to share basically right, what I've learned.
Game on, Murali. So, you've been a fierce and a fury leader, and you just touched upon being a startup mindset. So let's start with this is how are you seeing, we've had a transformational evolution. Now we're calling an exponential evolution. What's your take on a single owned CEO companies? Is the reality a fad or something that's going to fade out? Is that something reality? And how do you see this? Because running a single one man CEO company is not easy. We've seen the likes of Klarna. They fired people, they bought people. Is that a reality or a fable?
Well, I think there's a yes and no to that, right? If you really look at that, there are companies, right, that are building the products, but for you to horizontalize it, it's always comes down to human touch. You just can't be alone, basically. I think at the end of the day, it's all about humans, create the value for humans and the whole world, basically, right? It comes down to that. But this is the era where intelligence is becoming like available to everyone, whoever has it, right? So now the question is who can really apply that intelligence to really produce outcomes? So there are, obviously opportunities for you to get started being a single CEO, then you go there. But right, that's where your scope, and at the end of the day, it comes down to the people, the engagement, right? The handshakes that you have. So you need the core team. That's my belief, actually. Yes, you can build technology products behind the scenes, right? That can influence basically. So putting it in autonomous fashion by one person, will it become $1 trillion company? I don't know.
I'm a big believer in human centric model, and I honestly don't know even if you're a single one man CEO. Our biological brains needs this physical sense and touch. We need compassionate people. We need passionate people to share and all. I wonder, just being a one man CEO, you could build a product, but if it doesn't touch a human life or make it impactful, I feel it can die down.
Yeah, you're right, actually, right? The purpose is very, very important. And that's what all the experts are talking about. I have the experience of building a kind of being involved in a wellness platform in my career, basically, right? You bring all the aspects of the wellness, basically. For example, someone to do good, there's a basically concept of physically fit, mentally agile. Of course, some of the morals that you learn from your the teachers and parents, and also that you take with you, and the socially accepted, financially fit. The social aspect is very, very, very important for humans. We all know that, right? We are social animals, you and I, basically, right? We can't live away from people.
We are
And,
not. We are not.
yeah, I love it. That's what really brings the passion, right, towards me. So the idea is that the social acceptance. Now the question is, one member CEO, what is that one member CEO is trying to do? Now there is a community, he's being a community influencer. Yeah, makes sense, basically, right? But the thing is, some point in time, it has to become a physical experience, basically. So what does it mean? What is the operating model, right? Yes, you can create a value, but I always use this analogy that comes to my mind, basically. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
That's a great way.
So that togetherness is very important.
It's philosophical and diabolical too.
Yeah, so that's very important in my opinions, and that's what, honestly, right? It's like you learn from your leaders. I'm fortunate to be guided and coached by some of those people, especially the people. I mean, they worked in U.S. military, and then they learned like Marine Corps and all that, and they influenced me quite a bit, actually. Some of these, right? How do you really like go about approaching the solutioning, and then how do you win the people, basically? What is the discipline needed, basically, right? So the times you got to really, and I used to be a little softer in the beginning. Later on, they taught me a concept of healthy tensions. It's okay to really question, right? I think that's very important, basically. So for you to really, really, right, maximize what is the purpose of the life, it goes back to, right? At the end of the day, the outcomes, how do you really make this planet better? I think that's what it comes down to.
You remind me of Zach Cass, the former head of GTM of AI, former GTM head of AI. He wrote this book called Renaissance, and he was actually one of our keynote speakers for our event. Remember, he talked about the kids running around butterflies and all. We're losing that Midas touch, and he says that with AI, we'll have time actually for humans to collaborate more. So you actually remind me of that.
Yeah, and absolutely. I mean, the idea is that, for example, the AI, some of these mundane tasks, some of these even the semi-intelligent tasks, I don't know where the AI is. I always say that, AI can think like you, probably they can act like you. Can it feel like you? I don't think so. Basically, feeling is where like the conscious.
I think countries are already working on this physical AI, right?
Yeah, the physical AI. I was looking at recently like one of these, the videos like that appeared like a couple of days ago. The robot was dancing, and then he was trying to doing the kickbox and type of thing. It went and kicked a kid, actually. So the idea is that, right? Yes, there are limitations, right? And of course, it evolves over a period of time. For example, I would like to have a bot that does my lawn mowing, actually. That would be great. The reason,
We still have, right? All right now.
yeah, I mean, so we're getting there. But how about someone who is going to wash dishes, basically, clean the toilet bowls, basically? Why would somebody wants to do that, right? Those are the things that you can basically, right, delegate to these,
Primus is
these-
coming very soon from
yeah,
Tesla.
Optimus, basically, right? So
Optimus. Yeah.
Optimus, yeah. So I think we have to wait and see. The future is, I think, I mean, Demis Hassabis, he calls it as world modeling, like, right? So he's Faifeli, I mean, whom I respect the most, actually, one of the most respected leaders, in my opinion. So, about AI, so they talk about this world modeling. I think, that's where the time and space come together. So far, it's only single dimensional, like, you're judging the text and one after the other.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's where you can really bring a lot of changes.
The multidimensional polarity.
Yeah. So what happens, for example, uh, you have today, for example, in the healthcare world, I think the metaverse is a pretty ambitious, concept.
That died down.
Yeah. But I believe some parts of metaverse is going to be there.
Yes.
So, for example,
Industrial metaverse actually has picked up.
yeah,
There is a company over here called Worlds.io. We're not endorsing anyone. And I myself, we had from an architecture built this digital twin of an enterprise. So it's not a metaverse, but you are getting a practical visibility into your organization.
yes, I think the digital twins is going to be a concept. So far we talk about this, the virtual world, and all that. But the idea is that you have all of these agents, basically chat GPTs, mythos, all kinds of things. But the thing is, what is a digital version of you? How do you look at yourself 20 years down the road, 30 years down the road? That's called hyper-personalized, basically, right?
Or do you think you'll be in 20 years from now?
Yeah, so exactly right. So the goal is, in fact, I have the exposure of seeing, right, some of these basically. You take a scale and look at the entire basically, right, the health chart of a member, and then based on these parameters, you can take a scale, you can project it. What would be the health, what would be the trajectory, but that's based on the data. But AI doesn't think actually like how humans think. It's not there basically, right? You have to go beyond that. That's where the world models come into play, what new tech, whatever it is. But even today, for example, digital twin capability is really, really going to help um, uh, the individual members basically. For example, in healthcare, interoperability was a big topic, early 2000s, 10s, 13 and all that. So obviously, and then it became a lot of investments, and then a lot of committees have been formed and focus groups and all that. Now, at least doctor knows to some extent, right? Wherever the patient goes, at least the data is there in bits and pieces. But you know, the context doesn't follow the member, the person or patient, whatever you call. What does it mean when you say context? I'll give you a simple example, actually, very simple example, but profound in my opinion. You go to a doctor, doctor writes a prescription basically, right? You take the pills and you need a refill basically, right? You send a refill request. It's all automated today.
Yeah.
Alert goes to the doctor, right? Then what does doctor do? Doctor says that, okay, fine, I'm dropping the prescription, right? It goes to, he places it to
The pharmacy.
pharmacy. You know what pharmacy does? Pharmacy verifies if the member still has insurance coverage.
Yeah.
Right? And then the member has insurance coverage. They send it to approval to a payer, healthcare world basically, right? A payer has a PBM. There's a PBM, I don't want to get into all these nuances.
pharmacy.
Yeah, it's pharmacy basically backend, right? And again, PBM does a verification that does this member have eligibility. Sometimes the payer side of also does it. Okay, they come back. Sometimes there could be an approval needed basically, right? Because it's an advanced medication. They want to make sure that medical appropriateness is there. They're good procedures, in fact. People might not agree, but having seen that, they're pretty, in my opinion, they're pretty, they're maturing, and then, there's a lot being done. Every step of the way, you're again verifying the member has eligibility, member has a coverage, member has a coverage. What happens one of these subsystems go out of sync? Member service is gone. As a simple refill request, 5-6 levels of eligibility verification. My question is, why can't the context follow the member? For example, you go to the doctor verifies that. So there is a certified period of the verified context that has to follow through the system.
Along with
it, you should not ask fiscal, right? So that's what one of the companies, right? I know they're trying to solve actually. That's a noble cause, and that's going to help actually, right? And imagine the people who are sitting in the rural, Arkansas, rural Louisiana, so on and so forth, right? For them, having to wait every day is worth, because you need a medication, it gets shipped actually. A day is delayed.
There's a life.
It is Friday, then Saturday, Sunday are off, gone.
It
So
could be a
yeah,
different question.
so the question is, there are areas where AI and intelligence can solve these problems basically.
And are you using that right now?
So no, we are not there in the industry basically. The context, we don't even have the universal person ID. Right? It's a so we need to have universal person ID so that RAM, Balanagu, like it follows basically, right? And then of course there's the context boundaries and all that. It's a kind of mini blockchain. It's not blockchain per se, but it's like, how do you understand? It's like, so those are all the things that, the evolution of the technology will help solve. Once you have that, then digital will become, kind of a normalcy. The reason is you have, gene therapy, which is like, kind of
The CRISPR one.
Yeah, exactly, right? So a lot of things are happening where you can really, really, go down deep into the genome, and then, a lot of other aspects basically, right? And then portray a story, collect a story, basically that becomes a digital twin. And you can continue to really personalize it. Today it's all population health insights basis, but PHI, for example, I have, a million members with this particular condition. And based on our observation, when we give this particular pill, it's going to help address 99% of the people problem. But what happens is at 1%.
Yeah.
It's a, what do you do with them? So that's where the healthcare basically, right? It comes down to basically, right, the evolution, the next level basically. So the old models have to come together. We have to understand the, the better basically, right? And then connect the data. And then basically enable this so that the context follows, right? The actor, wherever the actor goes. That's future.
And I can clearly see the future and passion in what you're talking.
Yeah, that's where, so that needs to be solved. America needs it actually. Now than ever actually. We are such an advanced, like, imagine, right? For example, um, you have the intelligence sitting in your lap today, right? That would require like maybe 50 years worth of education, right? With thousands of people. But you have the intelligence. But the question is, how do you put to the practice? So I always say that, right? An idea on a paper is like, kind of today's newspaper can be tomorrow's waste paper,
That's interesting.
right? So the idea is you got to put it to the practice and then start producing basically.
So actually, on segue on that, the Perplexity CEO said that, the future data center is coming to your laptop. So don't you think with the data center coming to your laptop, first of all, actually, it's a big thing we're going to talk about a little bit more. If a data center comes to your laptop, imagine the power it gives to you. It almost feels like to me like the Peter Parker thing, where I become the most powerful, responsible person. So wouldn't a data center being at the finger touch of your this thing, can't we use AI to drive humanity for better? Like you talked about the workflow where the context has to flow and your prescription is not shut down. So what if the context is transferred? And I don't know what would it take, but wouldn't that massive compute, your infrastructure and AI, we are talking of swarms, mesh, we're going to talk about the governance and all. Wouldn't that progressing in this direction that you talked of saving the lives of the 1%?
Yeah, definitely. So the thing is, I think you don't need a big AI, for this particularly, the context, but you need an agreed upon operating model, right? For example, I studied several countries actually, right, how they operate basically. As much as, we take pride in what we do in terms of technology in the US, but if you really look at some of the UK system, right, and a member is a member, they know the exact uniqueness of a member basically. And similarly, Canadian
Each
system.
instance I know for sure has a different member
Yeah,
ID, the
so
group ID.
yeah, exactly. Here, we don't have that universal. We have social number, social security, but that's different financial risk.
That's financial.
But a member is a member.
For healthcare.
So for healthcare, anybody can go to hospital. It could be, a Canadian citizen, working here could go, and then someone who is on non-immigrant visa, they can go there. A student that can go there. The idea is that it's all about treating humans, because that's what US beauty about US is, right? They never deny care to anybody. When you go to the emergency, they never deny. That's fascinating actually. So as much as we have all these problems around healthcare, and which is like what is it's hitting 20% of our GDP, the aging population, advancing medicine. If you really look at the number of specialty drugs, actually, um, every year, I think the innovation every year it's pushing like dozens of drugs actually, right? Specialty drugs. Specialty drugs are extremely expensive. Sometimes they can run into tens of thousands of dollars a prescription, a dose actually.
And you've been in the prescription area, you know better than anybody else as how to use this. So speaking of this, Murali, when you have these kind of life cycles of or workflows, you got to move data, your infrastructure, your AI at scale and speed. But the reality is you have your legacy EHR, EMR systems. Walk me through, you know, how do you do transformation at scale and speed to support the speed of AI? And then you talked of this innovation drugs. Specialty drugs, not innovation drugs. Sounds weirder to me. Uh, so how are you? You've been a chief architect, you've been an acting CTO. How have you been driving? And more importantly, I'm big on humans. Change is only successful when people are involved. How are you driving at scale and how are you influencing people to drive this transformation and how are you getting success?
Yeah. So the idea is that, right, so there's no one single shortcut for you to be successful, right? I think at the end of the day, today's world, data is what really, right? Data is very, very important. It has been said for the decade over a decade that data is a new oil, and right, which is really help
So I think AI is now taking the term of
yeah. So right.
visit.
So I say that, this is what I say that, for example, right? People don't, the tech guys do not breathe oxygen anymore. They breathe AI. The idea is that if you don't pay attention towards AI for a couple of weeks, you feel like you're left behind by 6 months, actually, right? So the analogy I give is, tech guys have to breathe the AI every day, right? So, well, at the end of the day, right, to your point, what is that? There's no one success story. First, the most important thing is integration. That's the most challenging thing in anything, wherever you go. You have disparate systems, actually, right? And they don't talk, they don't have a canonical model where they speak the same language. And that's where healthcare has advanced. There's a concept of interoperability, FHIR, and FHIR, for fast health interoperability resource, which I'm not going to bore you with that, but that's common standard where hospitals, EMRs, payers, and labs can.
So in the workflow that you taught, can't you use that interoperability?
Yeah, they use it to some extent, but backend is still the data. You have to cut a feed to a PBM from a payer. Whenever a member is enrolled, PBM could be distinct, so you cut a feed. PBM has one thing, pharmacy could have something, data can be out of sync, member could have in. So that's an example that I was giving you. And these things, they have subsystems. For example, you need some kind of prior authorization approval for a particular drug. Sometimes a drug can require step therapy, okay, which means that they might advise you to take another drug, basically, right? Very simple. For example, I'll tell you, right? These are all good ones, actually. A diabetic patient who is taking, for example, let us say metformin, basically, right? And then they have these upset stomach, actually. Then what do? Basically, right? Then doctor could recommend something else, actually, right? Or so they look at,
Probiotics or something.
yeah. So, but the thing is, they might recommend that there's extended release tablet, ER tablet, basically, right? They might say that, or they might say that what, instead of this, you take another pill. I mean, by no means I'm a doctor, but this is where what I would observe, while as a technologist, basically, right? So those are the steps they have, but those subsystems, they are legacy systems. Sometimes they need to get the data copied. One small issue with the data can go out of sync.
So you can't give this step, what do you call that?
Step therapy,
Step
basically,
therapy.
right?
You
So
can't give
these
this.
are all I'm giving as examples, right? And I'm not saying that every step therapy is wrong, but these are the examples you could run into. Integration, right? So first challenge you run into is integration. How do you solve it? This is how I would always approach. How do you simplify it? Don't try to boil the ocean. If you have something that's working, it may be walking, that's okay. We don't have to make it run. It's walking. But make sure that the interoperability is maintained, basically, right? I mean, you're able to integrate with it, right? And that's where even if you look at the AI, they talk about semantic model. What is semantic model? The very English definition of data, so that
The business definition.
AI can understand that, simple terms, so that AI can really know where to go. Same thing, basically, right? When you really look at these transformation opportunities, you have to look at the workflow. You have to go to the workflow. So what is the end user experience that you want to influence, basically, right? And what is the outcome you want to produce, right? Where are your bottlenecks? That's where value stream mapping comes into picture, basically, right? And then you perform the assessment, and then you got to look at what are the top the big ticket items that you want to focus on, and you look at the cost base. You have to be very practical, basically, right? It comes down to your operating model. I always say that. So what is the funding mechanism? So that's where, remember, I talked when I started, top down, bottom up. They have to come into play, basically, together. You just can't, top down can't, push the
It
strategy.
almost feels like you're talking of the operating model, which we have discussed for eternity.
Yeah.
So you're talking of the top down, which is a strategic in nature, and bottom up is from the people at the bottom. But how much of their voice is held by your leadership?
Yeah, that's where, the middle layer, link comes into picture. I always use it. When a train, wagon is pulling all of these remaining wagons. When train engine
The engine is
pulling
pulling the wagon and the
wagons, right? The links, very, very important, right?
the crosslinks.
The crosslinks, right? The crosslinks are the manager. That's where the leadership comes into picture. Now you could argue that you can have a flat organization, right? Well, a flat organization works for tech companies, basically. Some of the companies, they know what you're doing. But when you're business centric, for example, you need a clinician to provide clinical decision knowledge.
And it's a third party.
Yeah, so right, third party, and then you need legal, basically, right? You need claims. This is a
So
business.
fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh.
Yeah. So, but if you leave it like wild west, how do you really grow the domain practice? So there's a reason why there's an organization structure that exists, right? Domain practice is very important. Someone who can really flatten, for example, I had one of the CIOs who is very bright, actually, very bright guy. So he was able to flatten the organization to some extent, basically, right? Very smart way. right? He just eliminated certain things. He moved certain things so that there's a structure. There is a domain centric approach still, but it's almost like kind of people don't have these layers actually. You can go easily, right? Yes, you can adjust it. So that's very important. The link is middle management is very important. They are the ones, right? That's where the domain expertise comes into picture.
You actually thrown a bunch of darts at me, but I'm figuring which dart to pick up. With AI, we are saying we don't need mid layer because you touched upon one thing is the semantic layer. What if I use AI to build the similar semantic layer, which is the business glossary for an IT guy, or even, these days, IT is also, everybody's using AI. If AI can build the semantic layer, aka the business layer, can't you influence? Yes, you will need, but can't you influence the domain thinking?
Yeah,
And then instead of a middle manager, can't AI be the middle manager?
yeah, it can be to some extent. Look, at the end of the day, today's AI, it can't, reinvent itself. Humans can't do
Well,
that.
we just saw Claude talk of recursive self-learning or something like that, RSL, right?
It self-learns, it improves itself. Let us say that, you coded for example, a for loop, actually, right? That's supposed to run 100 times.
Right.
It ran only 59 times. It corrects itself, it gets better to 100, right? But, I think, can you go back to 1970s, basically, right? Right? You just feed, Claude is so smart, right? Take the 1970s, the data,
Legacy data, like the
and
mainframes.
feed it to Claude. Today's Claude, Mythos Claude. Can we roll it forward so that it can think like how it is thinking today?
The modern languages, I think it can understand, but I don't know much about the legacy,
So,
whether it can.
so that's where, right? The very technology. It's again, this is my observation as a practitioner, basically, right? It's like you think about the basically based on the text. For example, the code. Why developers are being disrupted? Because the code is static. When you code something, it stays there.
Right.
The pattern is very it's all about. It comes down to it, basically, right? So they look at that. Oh, this is already there. They can dynamically match it. They can produce it, right? Code can be disrupted. But imagine having to really see, for example, I was thinking about digital twin example, right? How do you really advance? Does the context follow the member? I mean, how in the world AI know that? What are the pain points of the member? That's where the human in the loop comes into picture. Human can understand human, right? Down the road, I don't know, right?
But again, humans tend to, okay, AI has a bias, but humans are emotional. And if we are having a bad day, there's a perception that we may understand bad day. And then to camouflage or compound this, we have a cultural diversity. I keep saying is what is good in your culture might be bad in my culture.
Right.
So when you amplify this with a combination of culture versus emotion versus all, a human tends to make, and this is something that we're going to talk in my future is, when human makes a bad decision, it doesn't get viral. But AI agent, when it takes a while, I sometimes say poor AI. When AI makes a bad decision, it does go viral. It's like flights. 99% of the time they don't crash, but that 1%, it's lethal.
Oh,
It-
1% is a lot.
yes. But on the other hand, today pilots or flights, all the jets, the Boeing and the bus and all, from a runway, from a takeoff to the landing, they can be fully autonomous with the co-pilot. Not the co-pilot, sorry. What is it? What do you call it? Autopilot.
Autopilot.
Sorry, I'm calling co-pilot. So, look at, so when AI does something, we put in a magnifying glass and freak out. But when a human does, and there have been errors in the history of flights, accident fatal clashes, where humans have made mistakes. I'm not saying that this or that, but is it fair for us to put a magnifying glass on AI and say, you freak us out? But when a human does it, so today road rages. Don't If you go to the downtown around 4 o'clock p.m., you know how it is. And sometimes I feel AI is better, but sometimes I've had a bad accident where Waymo went bad too.
Yeah, so here's the thing, basically, right? It comes down to, remember, right? You are basically right. AI is pretty good, but the governance mechanism is what needs to mature.
True.
Okay, we are not there, basically, right? For example, Dario Amori, like he wrote a big article yesterday. Like I'm happy, basically. This is what I've been fighting in the past 10 years, actually, right? So the regulatory requirements are not catching up to the evolution of the technology. So we have the same old thinking, basically, right? But you can't solve, this new problem with old thinking. You just can't, basically, right? So y- that's very important, basically, right? So now imagine you're deploying a autopilot, for example, let us say, to your point, some Tesla, let us say, right?
FSD.
FSD, right? So you basically one small, let us say it has not learned that mistake. There are a million vehicles on the road. If million, let us say 10% of them, 100,000 of them run into the scenario, it could be fatal, right? So that's a concern. The scale of the AI is what causes concern, right? It is not the incidents basically. It's not ones and zeros. We don't have a mechanism on how to govern and scale AI. In my opinion, we are just wildly going basically, right? So I mean, Anthropic, as much as such a tech company, even their code, it seems
The fatal fire has serious problems.
so the idea is that yes, you can think about it. That's where the human in the loop. There are going to be bad actors everywhere. There's going to be accidents, right? It's impossible basically. The idea is scale. What is the scale? How do you control it basically, right? What is the kill switch? How do you know that basically? Where do you so that's what really, right? That's imagine a robot walking on the road, start kicking everyone and anyone who is there. How do you control it? I mean, where is the governance? Tell me.
So then why roll out to the public?
No, that's what I'm saying. It has evolved. The technology is moving
faster than the governance.
Exactly, right? Now you establish basically, right? Maybe there has to be a kind of a police robots, right, on the guarding, the people on the road basically, right?
What do you call agents for agents?
Agents for agents, yeah. That's the only way. I mean, I agent to agent interactions basically, right? So this is one of the things where, I was recently talking. How do you really trace the end to end basically? People are, oh yeah, I capture prompts and then, I understand all that. No, it doesn't, it only starts there basically. So you have to really have the visibility end to end. You have to come up with a story basically, right? So what kind of tools are being called basically, right? And what is the output produced? Is there a malefic intent basically, right, of the prompting? And then what is the effectiveness of the inferencing basically, right?
So you're kind of using eval and all of
and all that, right? You have to really, again, it has to play the whole story. That's the level of the confidence and then runtime governance and ability to have the observability. Then we say that we can adopt AI, right? But I'll tell you, AI governance, I'm telling you, it's called layer 6. That's what I call. I don't know which layer it is because I seek inspiration from ISO OSI layer. I'm a communication engineering guy at the end of the day. That's 7 layers.
That's at your heart.
Yeah. So that's what, I'm always used to. I always take a knowledge. I mean, I think I was listening to, Chamat,
Chamat Palipali.
yeah, Palivali, right? So he would use this layer 7 approach actually quite a bit. I seek, inspiration, but I always think in layers actually, right? So the governance of AI is very, very important. It's very important. People think that, no, when you're rolling out an organization, governance is very important. Who is at the, who's on point. When you flatten the organization, let's go back to that, where I was leading basically.
Yeah, that's very important.
Yeah, if you flatten the organization, where's accountability? You have to make accountability clear. You have to make the expectations clear, basically, right? So that's the reason why you want to have the domain expertise, basically, right? And as and when AI is mature and you can start further, kind of realigning the model. But in my opinion, there has to be a guiding force, especially, right? Especially in the healthcare world, right? It's about I remember actually, I'll give an example, right? In I mean, again, I'm trying to be as much organization independent as possible. In my one of my careers, basically, I built this mail order pharmacy, which is a full advanced like mail order, which used to run in robotics. Again, right? I don't have any association with them. So when we built it, like I still remember activating the first drug to drug interaction logic after working on it for 3.5 months actually, because drug to drug interactions they can be very tricky. I mean, talking about, right? So then we just roll out and then we go there and then I think it's fine, and all of a sudden basically it was after a week. It was Friday actually, exact Friday. Then morning I went there. It was intensive, like in transformation project, and it's one of the most challenging projects that I ever worked in my life basically, right? So my manager calls me, come here buddy. I said, hold on, I don't have time, I have 6 people waiting for me and all that, so no, come here. Showed me a letter actually. I remember thanked actually. This is a drug that another provider provided me, and I had issues with this, but I couldn't understand. They advised me to take it. I took it, and it was causing heart palpitations. Thank you guys. You called me in the morning. You said it. You're taking this drug basically. Stop it. You go to the other person and you reconcile your medication. That's what technology can do, basically, right?
Wow, that's so inspirational.
So he wrote a letter, thank you letter.
To you, to
So
the
yeah, to the organization,
pharmacy.
basically. Yeah, and then it got forwarded, and then it was like right there, the desk actually.
That's a transferring, inspiring journey.
Yeah, so it's like that, you can do a lot of things in a healthcare world, but the thing is very important is, zero tolerance, right? There's no scope for margin of error is very limited, basically, right? So yes, you can transform, right? Data is very important, basically. Your context has to follow the member. Integration, right, is very focused, basically, very, very important. You can apply AI to really eliminate the silos and bring the operational efficiencies, right? But it has to be human in the loop. It has to be human in the loop.
You and I also had touched upon this topic of human on the loop. Let's talk about human on the loop.
In the loop or on the loop, they're different little bit. I have like various levels actually, right? Human in the loop is always for every.
So in this layer 6 OSI layer, let's talk of where do you see human in the loop and human on the loop?
No, layer 6 is the observability. I always put it in the layer 6, basically,
Right.
all of them. So right, so it's like layer 1 is infrastructure. The same thing is no different.
Yep.
Layer 1 infrastructure, language models, and then all the intermediate
data and all of those.
that, right? Layer 6 is where you take governance and observability. That's what I see, right? So you basically, right, you have to really human in the loop versus human on the loop. When you're moving towards agentic AI, right, organizations have to realize, right, what is the level of the agency basically they're comfortable with, and they have to define it. There's no single rule. If you talk to Gartner, they'll give you 8. If you go to somebody else, Infotech, like they'll give you. And beautiful. I mean, they're all like different like versions, right? And I was looking at Harvard and McKinsey. They all define different things basically, but you have to settle down on one thing that's really going to make it easy. So in my mind, human in the loop, actually, for every decision an AI takes, a human has to bless it. It could be a prior authorization review. It was a finding, then a nurse has to kind of look at it, right? Human on the loop. Human on the loop is AI makes decisions and informs human, basically, right? And then when AI doesn't know what to do, that's when it will send a different message. Human on the loop is he's on the loop, but only when needed, basically. Right?
And he has a control.
Control, yes, he can control, he can turn it off. High agency is you're empowering AI to take actions. It only comes to you when it runs out of options, basically. That's the difference between a little bit of human on the loop, but high agency. Full agency is bonkers, right?
That's autonomous mode.
No. So, I mean, at least this is what in my mind, right? So you got to really understand what kind of decisions you're making. For example, your Teams meeting you're addressing, right? It summarizes it. Maybe it's fully autonomous, right? People have to verify it, basically, right? That's okay. But high autonomy is, right? You're perhaps, for example, we get all these emails, member requests, actually, right? And then we have high confidence base. We know that this belongs to customer service. This belongs to claims department. This belongs to provider organization. This belongs to physician organization, right? We direct it actually automatically. So that's a high agency. So like that, you got to look at the business processes, and then if you don't really rethink and try to really reimagine the workflow, I don't know whether you can move from outcome-based journey to value-based journey when you adopt AI. It's very, very, very important.
You touched upon this topic, and the world is talking of outcome based, and now you come and say we need to think value based. So actually, it's a twofold question I have. When you're talking of a value versus an outcome, wouldn't an outcome necessarily translate into value?
Yes, but not necessarily all the time. You produce an outcome. For example, let us say, I automated this particular task basically to produce an outcome. For example, the emails that right we get.
I improved my productivity by
Yes,
10%.
exactly right. But what is the value eventually generating to the organization? Are you able to serve the customer faster?
Possibly.
Right? Are you able to? That's what you need. But not all the time. You're talking about value is one particular. It's like verticalization basically. That department, right? That team has done it well. That's value. But that's outcome. Sorry, outcome. When I meant say
Outcome when you quantified and value is qualified.
Yeah,
Right.
value is horizontal.
Horizontal. But
Yeah.
when you use value as qualified, enterprises run on corporate P&L.
Yeah.
They run on a balance sheet and they run on a dollar. They're not there on, we're doing a Gandhian philosophy or something like that. Yes, I'm making the customer happy, but then I was able to reduce his bill by so much. So that is an outcome based. So why is it better to have an outcome and a value based or a hybrid model or a?
So to begin with, it'll be a hybrid model, right? So usually for innovation, you try to look at outcomes, basically, right? You test, learn, and you outcome, right? That's fair. For you to scale it, you have to go to value. It comes down to the number is dollar, how much you're spending. Let us say that, for example, why would Microsoft turn off the Mythos within 3 months actually for the developers? They spent the money, basically, right? The question is, if they're able to bring in the value, they would have kept it on. Yeah, they are able to produce outcomes. Outcomes are like they're able to sprint faster. But what is the overall value? That's a thinking basically. It's a cultural thing. It's your mindset thinking. How do you really tie? Because now it's AI is no longer a kind of a a test and learn thing or experimentation or exploration.
It's all in or all out.
Yeah. So now, right? So you got to. So now the idea is that you got to really tie it actually. What is the budget basically, right? So I have $10 million. Let us say you're spending on something. So what does it mean for me in terms of value? So I call it a business AI basically, right? Because
Let's expand business AI.
yeah. So I mean I call again, right? This is me using it. I always say business AI, which means that you are applying AI to really produce the business outcome and generating the value basically, right? So people might say that what, I have a Snowflake, and the other guy would say that I like Databricks. I want to build this, right? Another guy might say that what, I have another excellent
The
platform.
Google BigQuery or
Yeah,
the Amazon
BigQuery.
Redshift.
So every platform has AI. They might argue that for this outcome, it's good. But overall, you look at the overall organization basically. What does it mean in terms of what does it take for us to first of all float the platform? How do you govern the platform? What is the skill set? What is the knowledge base? How do you bring to the table? That's a value model basically.
Interesting. And now you touched about these systems, and you also touched about interoperability. When you have two systems, isn't it a challenge to build the interoperability from a data process and systems? Because you got to send data to Snowflake, you got to send to Databricks, and then you have the whole 9 years of managing. When you have a multitude of systems, how do you do the interoperability and how can you provide value at scale?
Yeah, beautiful question you asked. That's where the architecture comes into picture, basically. Right now, I'm removing my
The hat of an
leadership hat,
architect.
basically, right? I'm bringing the architecture. That's where the data fabrics, right, come into play, basically, right? So you have to bring the data fabric mindset, and that's where the pattern comes into picture. It's more art than science, actually. So you have to put your bets. Whatever the data fabric that you choose, you build it so that at any point in time you're able to really bring the data here, no matter which system you bring in, right? And then you bring that, you build that, I call it as canonical model, and also you have to have that event driven mindset, right? As things are happening, how do you sync up? That's an investment you have to make, basically, right? You have to build it, you have to influence. That's where you add the value to the organization. It's a technology concept, but you have to sell it to your leadership.
Technology is evolving so fast, and since we touched upon that, if you see today in agents, we have agent to agent architecture in MCP. But if you really see, there are a couple of things as the agents of Google do not talk to the agents of Microsoft. The agents of Microsoft do not talk to this. So we say interoperability, but it feels like old wine and new battle. We had a problem with EDI, EAI, then we went to SOA. Of course, not to forget the ESB. From SOA, we went into API, and then we had the event-driven architecture. And now we are calling an agent-to-agent architecture. But if you see, it's all AI driven, but it's all the same principles and patterns that we had been doing for the last 20-25 years.
Yeah, very, very good observation. You don't find this anywhere in the internet, basically, right? I think what you are bringing up is an excellent question. That's true. So MCP has finally evolved, actually, right, for integration of agents with the rest of the ecosystem, basically, right? That's a winner, clear winner. Now, agent to agent is still evolving. I think MCP can be used, right? Directly or indirectly. That's where A2A is being prescribed by Google. That's an industry thing, basically. I mean, what is the common contracts that they agree to? What is the,
And this feels like,
protocol?
again, canonical model is coming back.
Yeah, no, it's the same. That's what I'm saying. It's art than science. When I was telling you, right? It is how you orient yourself, basically, right? Don't be stuck on technology, basically, right? You have to build it in such a way that you just that's a problem. I mean, agent to agent is a problem. For example, in my real world, like I said it, agent to agent interactions, that's where observability is key.
Yep.
I don't know. I mean, I'm very flexible for you to enable the integration, but most important thing is um, tracing is very important, right? And
Traceability and lineage.
agility is very, very important for me. Auditability is very important for me, right? And consistency, right? Transparency. So you have to define your responsible AI principles honestly. So responsible AI principles have to align with this basically model. And it depends on the organization, what the organization does. I mean, some of the organizations are like pretty stringent. Then for example, it comes down to enterprise compliance, risk, and information data management, and then data protection. There are 4 pillars actually.
4 pillars. Yeah,
they're
like
very
the Dharma Dimbok life cycle.
Exactly right. Yeah. So and then you have to really expand upon, for example, data bias, and privacy is very, very important, and then security of the systems are very important. Like that, you have to define the principles and then devise the policies anchored to all those principles, and then influence the processes
And the people.
right? And that's what operating model, and that's very, very, very people ignore it. They think that it is somebody's job. No, it is your job, because you'll have implications as a leader.
Yep. So we are coming to the fag end of it. What's your take, or how do you envision the future as an individual, as an entrepreneur, and as an executive leader?
Yeah, so the future basically, right? So I think there are two folds basically, right? The optimist and then the so-called I don't say pessimist. I'm not a pessimist basically, right? You want to really challenge
You're
people.
chiming or echoing what Zach said.
Really, yeah. So the optimist in me clearly, right, says that the knowledge is what is really right, march forward the humanity. Okay, right, all the way from steam engines to the industrialization to the PC computing to the mobile world, the cloud computing, the AI computing, and all that, right? And then physical AI is going to be reality. Excuse me. So human, I think centric approach is very important in my opinion, right? Um, what I'm excited about is advancement, basically, right? The empowerment of the humanity, the inventions, basically, right, that are not otherwise possible, basically, right? For example, the AlphaFold. I mean,
That is an amazing, marvelous piece of AI.
Exactly right. So similarly, there are a lot. In my again, I'm a healthcare technologist at heart. My actually, right, at least ambition and right, at least like my thought process is that in 20 years from now, right, you're going to have your agent sitting right next to you. That agent is the digital twin of you, that comes with you, stays with you, work for you, live with you, basically, right? And then helps enhance you, basically, right? That is what is going to happen. And now the question is purpose you can always find, actually. That's important in my opinion. Of course your food security is important, your economy is important, but health is everything. If you don't have health, what do you do?
Health is wealth.
Yeah, that's one thing. On the other side, basically, right? Yes, I think the guardrails are very important for AI. How do you really, right, organize the of course your I mean all this jurisdictions and all that, but the country's safety is very important, right? And how do we operate together with our allies, right? This is imagine this is something that you're putting that knowledge into the pockets of every human being, but the question is how humans react, how they integrate, what do they put into the system. The governance is very, very important. I think it's like when we are able to handle nuclear bomb, right? We are able to govern it. Why can't we govern AI? That's my thinking, basically.
Yeah.
Those are the two things I would say.
True. So you actually finish it in a style. So I would say that basically for a healthy enterprise and a healthy being of wealth, a person, you need good governance in both aspects.
Yep, correct.
That's right.
Yeah.
This is so fantastic and phenomenal. Murali, time just flew away. Again, thank you for your time.
Sure.
And thanks to Simform for making this a reality. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.